In the previous video, we used a serverless framework to auto-generate some code for us, including a function handler. Now let's learn a little bit more about programming Lambda functions with Node.js. We're going to take a closer look at the function handler and in particular its arguments, the event, context, and callback objects. I have opened the handler.js file from our video from before. Let's delete the code that's in the function body. One way to learn about the event and context object would be to just log them out on the console. Let's see what this gives us. SLS invoke local. So I want to locally invoke this first and see what the output is. And the function name is hello. Okay, my event apparently is null. Let's see what the context is. And the context actually gives me an object. Since I invoke it locally, it's some information from this emulated or mocked local environment. For example, a hard-coded string that says ID for the AWS request ID, the memory limits in megabytes, and so on. Let's change the code a little bit, and instead of logging it out on the console, let's send it back via our callback, as it was before. But this time, we not only give back the event, but also some information from our context, like the remaining time in milliseconds, the function name, and the request ID. Let's invoke it locally first. Okay, we get back status code, event doesn't exist, response time is a hard-coded value of 5000 milliseconds, the function name, and the hard-coded ID. Now let's deploy our function and invoke it remotely. Alright, our function has been deployed. And now let's invoke it remotely. And here we can see that the remaining time in our remote execution is 5998 milliseconds. The timeout that is specified by default is 6 seconds. So at that point, when the remaining time was calculated, we had used 2 milliseconds. And the ID of our request now also looks quite different from our local execution. But the event is still empty. Let's change that. Let's invoke our function with a synthetic event. I create an event.json file, and in that file, put a JSON object that says foo and bar. And now I'm going to invoke, let's first invoke the local function, and I give it the path to my event.json file. There's a short notation again, so instead of typing path, we can also type -p. And now I get back the event that I have invoked my Lambda function with. And if I invoke it remotely, I get the same event, because I also invoked the remote function with my local event in the event.json file. Okay, let's take a quick look at the callback object. What happens if we don't provide a callback object? Can we still execute our Lambda function? Let's try out. Oh, actually I haven't deployed it, so let's invoke the local Lambda function. And we can invoke it. It doesn't throw an error, but it also doesn't give us a response back either. What happens if we invoke the callback function without any arguments? It's basically the same as having no callback function at all. What about invoking it with null? Has the same effect. Now, how can I throw an error? We have an error first callback function, so this should give us an error. oh no, an error. Alright, in the next video we are going to take a closer look at testing and debugging Lambda functions. Stay tuned.